Welcome to the Gnostic Warrior, Frank. How are you doing today?
I am superb. How are you?
Great. And it's awesome to have you on the show. I'm excited to learn more about your great work. But before we learn more about that work, can you tell the audience a little bit about your history?
Sure thing. I'm an architectural historian by training, a rather bizarre profession to be a historian of architecture. But it began many years ago when I'd spotted some rather bizarre features on a local legislative building. But it sent me down a rabbit hole of discovery and enchantment. I have a number of academic degrees and qualifications that all stemmed from trying to unlock this building, ranging from um, early biblical history to ancient Near Eastern languages, something that is completely useless unless you're parsing the Hebrew Bible. And then I did history of art and Western mystery tradition, or what's known as Hermetic philosophy and related currents. And then I did my doctorate at the University of Cambridge on the architecture of Freemasonry, in particular, the British Gothic revival.
That's fascinating. That progressive history where you're driving, we'll talk about this, right? To pass the Manitoba legislative building and something's opened up within you. But when I heard that story, and then I also learned a little bit about your history, I feel that, that biblical scripture studying and research, I feel played a part in that. And then of course plays a part now. And as you know, it all intertwines through history, from Freemasonry to Judaism, Solomon's Temple, and so forth. So it's a fascinating history, one that I love to learn more about. So tell us about what happened when, in your hometown, you're driving past this building and all of a sudden this awakening happens within you.
Well, what happened was, a curious glance on the roof of a local building, I spotted these two recumbent Egyptian sphinxes on the front facade. Buildings, the Manitoba Legislative Building. So I'm a proud Winnipegger, been here most of my life. I hadn't noticed that before. Everyone knows it iconically for the Golden Boy eclipsing the dome. But the sphinxes, it was as enchanting as the classical myth of deciphering the riddle of the Sphinx. So I spot these sphinxes, park my car, look up, ask, what are they doing there? That beckoned me into the mystery of the building. And little did I know that it was the masterwork of an ingenious British architect and Freemason named Frank Worthington Simon. And he spent his life in what he called the recovery of the lost principles of ancient architecture. But what he did was leave a series of breadcrumbs throughout the building that he carefully placed, hoping, and in fact, I think wanting to be figured out. So like Hansel and Gretel, he placed these series of breadcrumbs, but it's so eclectic that even though the buildings in what's called the neoclassical vernacular, there were elements that came from the religious traditions of the world, and then ultimately deriving from the philosophy of Hermeticism, and greatly inspired by King Solomon's Temple and a Masonic reconstruction of King Solomon's Temple. So he was classically trained. He was a fellow of the Royal Institute of British Architects. He went to the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris. And he comes to Winnipeg in 1913 and deposits thousands of years, 5,000 years of lost architectural knowledge, encodes it in this building. And then when he left in 1920, he said something so bizarre, yet appealing. He said that this building would, in the course of time, make the people that visit it, and in particular the government, more intelligent, better balanced, and altogether more civilized human beings. And more so that perhaps one person in 100 years will understand the true mysteries of the Manitoba Ledge, as we proudly know of it. So it took about 100 years to the day that I spot this Sphinx, and my life was changed forever.
That's an awesome story. And these buildings, they're built a lot different, of course, than we have here, our residential structures, right? They're built to last. So this building's how old?
It's just 100 years old.
Okay.
Celebrated its 100th year last year.
Wow, that's great. And do you know what religion he was a member of by any chance?
I think he was a high Anglican Protestant, but more so, he derived his knowledge of history and wisdom from the Hermetic corpus. He briefly was part of a Hermetic circle in Paris during the end of the 19th century, and that was a time of an ecumenical approach to religious traditions. The idea that uh, the fruit of real knowledge sprung from an original source, and it was the pursuit of the real intellectual to go back to that original source, and that was connected to the laws of Moses, to even the Prophet Muhammad. So I wouldn't narrowly put him into one particular class, but I think most certainly Christian. His father was an Anglican nonconformist. He wrote many books on Christology, but he had a particular mystical bent on the Christological revelation, that he was moved by Swedenborg and several other Western esoteric thinkers from the 18th century. So I would put him in the class of a magus, an architectural magus, a kind of Prospero with deep Christian leanings.
Sure, and it seems that Freemasonry, when these men of learning become Freemasons, of course, and they might be a member of religion, they always go back to the East, right? Us brothers, we go to the East and the learnings, and a lot of us learn that our roots and possibly our ancestors come from that area as well. And it's through these buildings and through these teachings that have been passed down to us that I believe activates a gnosis, that possibly happened with you as well. Do you know anything about your history of your family? If anybody was involved in Freemasonry and architecture and stuff like this, or religion possibly?
No, not at all. I have I'm remarkably convinced that we probably originally began as crypto Jews and migrated to southern Italy. I have reason to believe that on several fronts. My last name is part of a tradition of analytical Jewish thinkers derived from Joseph Albo. I spent 4 years of my life looking at the Hebrew Bible and studying the Semitic scripture and inscriptions, even though I'm Italian from a Roman Catholic family. But I think somewhere deep in my DNA, there is probably some Jewish ancestry.
Yeah, definitely. I think if you look at Christianity, I mean, it spawns from Judaism, right? We have the Old Testament, and then that gave us the New Testament. So they basically, the Hebrew, then it was written into the Greek, the New Testament, and then the Latin. Once Rome came into control, when they took over Greco-Roman Egypt, and that's the age that we live in. But a lot of us come from different areas in the globe, and our ancestors and so forth. And I feel that when we're drawn to this type of work and we have that type of passion, I feel it is that DNA gnosis, something within us and maybe our ancestors. And when we start going down that path and we just go further and further, and that's what I see with you, Frank, and myself and a lot of other people that are interested in this type of knowledge, that it's just this never ending quest. And it's almost like we're finishing possibly, what our ancestors may have not have finished, or in our own way, but also living in the modern world as I believe they would want us to live. So what happened, Frank, after this awakening? I know, of course, the story, but let's tell the audience what happened.
So I was entranced to walk into the building. I was immediately greeted by these two large bison. And at that time, I was doing a pre-master's degree in ancient Near Eastern languages and cultures. So you can't understand anything about the ancient Middle East without a lexicon of temple architecture. And at the entrance of temples were typically two large horned bulls. So we go from these sphinxes on the outdoor, walking into this gorgeous grand staircase, these two recumbent bulls. And I thought, that's rather curious. Directly above the bulls is a apotropaic icon of Medusa, the figure of the Gorgon. Bizarre, but I later understood what that meant. So I start ascending up the stairs, and as I'm reaching the top stair, I'm thinking to myself in the back of my mind, having done temple architecture in graduate school, that if I were to discover an altar next, maybe, because that was the predicate of temples, they were tripartite. You'd have let's call it a room of protection, a place for offerings, or the altar, and then ultimately in the Far East, the Holy of Holies, as it was in King Solomon's temple, also tripartite. So I'm thinking, as I'm going up the stairs for the first time, now, with my eyes open, if I were to find an altar next, maybe there's a thesis here. And sure enough, I peer over the edge of an area called the Rotunda down to what's called the Pool of the Black Star. And voila, directly in front of me is this mural of Christ's journey, the Passion journey to Gethsemane. And architecturally, it was just like a voila, an aha moment.
So like you had this intuition, and then literally seconds later, it's answered. You were right.
Well,
Right?
yeah, I mean, I was hoping it would be intuition guided by some reason. So I put on the academic toque and said, if X, then maybe Y. And that's been my 10-year odyssey of the building. I would constantly probe it with, kind of an Occam's razor approach, take the most likely outcome. And throughout, I would just pose these questions and think, for instance, throughout the building, the number 13 repeats throughout, the number of stairs, the number of lights, the number of lights around the rotunda, dimensionally inside the building. Also 666 is replete throughout the building. And I thought, okay, clearly this very learned architect didn't just employ these numbers, which are deeply laden with religious symbolic meaning. There must be some merit to it. And then they were, I guess the best way to describe it, as a kind of like siren call, an allure to beckon me to something much, much deeper. So that's how the building was designed. I earnestly believe that architecture was put to the use of making people that unlocked the building's architecture a better person. And of course, that very much dovetails with the raison d'etre of Freemasonry, which is that architecture, among all disciplines known to the human mind, not basket weaving or manufacturing shoes, but architecture. Architecture is the vehicle of moral, spiritual, ethical illumination. And so he wasn't just a Freemason, but an architect who imbued from the Masonic vocabulary, history, and knowledge, and then incorporate it in his final building. So it was really his swan song after a life of being a largely celebrated architect. Most of his buildings were destroyed, but this is the one he wanted to be chiefly remembered for. And he placed it in, to borrow a biblical phrase, the least among cities, in like a Bethlehem, as it were, the Bethlehem of the North, Winnipeg, a city of no other merit than being, surface temperatures comparable to that of Mars. Very, very cold. And its building has stood the test of time.
Interesting. And I find it fascinating that these, monuments and these structures, like this is a legislative building. Essentially, people that go there are what we would call in the past would be sinners, right? Receiving their sentences or their civil cases, working that stuff out. And a lot of these structures are built similarly to temples or to churches. It's real interesting. And I've been in quite a few myself here in, California. They might not be close to as magnificent as that, but they all have that strike of awe, and they're all built of stone and high ceilings, and it's pretty interesting. Have you ever thought about that as far as these structures being similar to the temple? And then of course you've mentioned in other interviews about these, these gorgons and the Medusa and so forth, and those are to ward off evil spirits. And of course, these are the sinners coming in there. It's interesting.
Well, in this case, this is the building where the laws are enacted in Manitoba,
Oh,
not a
okay. I'm sorry.
courthouse. Although I know decidedly what you're alluding to,
Yeah.
is that typically that's been the style of architecture for stately power, whether it's a bank or whether it's a
The
court of
Senate
laws.
building. Yeah. Court of law.
Yeah,
Correct.
yeah. But in most cases, they will just borrow the style, the veneer of classicism as a tribute to Greek rational philosophy. But in this case, he didn't just riff off a vernacular theme in architecture. He also incorporated the ideology of a temple, even your pursuit into the temple. The itinerary of walking through the building is as important as the structure itself. It is an initiatic experience to walk through it. And if you walk through it in a very particular way and unlock what is presented, and in some cases they're so glaringly obvious it beckons the question why. That's pretty much the thesis of the building. Show an anomaly and imbue in the mind of the visitor, why is that there? And then that reflective process takes you on the journey through the building. And in that sense, he cribbed a lot from 18th century French Masonic architecture. It was typically folly gardens that were built by Masonic aristocrats at the end of the 18th century that would design gardens and place within them what are called fabriques, a ruined temple, an inscription in Latin to be deciphered in an environment that looks like it was carved by nature, but everything was specifically placed there in exactly their order. So as you walked through this itinerary through the garden, you were unknowingly, if you were an uninitiated Freemason, being inculcated with the three ritual grades of the craft. And that was their way of disseminating Masonic principles onto the mind in a beautiful surrounding. So I think part of his learning came from wanting to not just conceal the degrees of the craft within the confines of the lodge, but take the liturgical, ceremonial, symbolic aspects of the lodge and imbue them in a public building. So on one level, it's a building where laws are enacted in the neoclassical style, but on another, it's a temple of reformation. And very much this is been from Anderson's Constitution of the Freemasons, written several hundred years ago. That was the purpose of Freemasonry, was to bring about the reformation of the world. Through what? Through architecture. And through what building? What? Oh, King Solomon's Temple, the greatest and only, the first and greatest of God's architectural projects. So Solomon's Temple is definitely at the heart of this building. But he has also woven within it a treatise on architectural principles of many traditions, and then ultimately tied together, brought together like a Persian rug through Hermeticism, Hermetic philosophy. And basically, no, I'm riffing here, but four principal themes are the guiding principles of the building: numerology, geometry, astrology, and alchemy. Now, you might think that those are outside of the canon of Freemasonry, but they very much are a part at a philosophical level.
I agree. Definitely, Frank. Well said. And have you met his family at all? Do you know if they're still interested in this type of stuff? Or?
No, I mean, no, I haven't met any of his children. He did have one daughter who died a number of years ago, but when I actually first began my research in British Columbia. He retired in Maintenant on the French Riviera in this beautiful town where his body is laid to rest in a beautiful cemetery. And during the last years of his life, he spent some time with W.B. Yeats, the great English poet and hermeticist of the end of the 19th century.
That's great. You tracked down to where he was buried. That's
Oh
interesting.
man, oh, I was like obsessed with this man. Not only did we have the same name, but I felt in some way, and I know this sounds uncanny, but when I read his words that he said that perhaps only one person in 100 years would truly figure it out, I felt in some sense that I'd been bequeathed this legacy of what he was intending to do. And as I mentioned, it sent me on an academic odyssey. I studied ancient languages to understand the inscription that he carved on the roof of the building, which was in Middle Egyptian hieroglyphics. I ended up doing biblical studies because he learned to read Greek, Hebrew, and Latin by the time he was 13 years old from his father, and that was very much a part of his level of learning, and then ultimately Hermeticism, because of Hermes rests on the dome of the building, the golden boy, and then architecture, because he was an architect, and I wanted to understand, what is it? I mean, why is architecture so important to Freemasonry, and why is it a discipline that among all other known to the human mind and imagination has the biggest impact on our soul? He believed that, and I actually tend to believe that too.
Yeah, me too. And it's interesting. What I'm doing today is involved with indoor air quality and fixing people's homes that have water damage and mold. And we're finding out, these homes are incredibly unhealthy. The way we build them, the chemicals, the paint, the everything, and then the stuff we put in them, and then now we see people's health across the world. It's declining. Maybe we could say part of it is part of the architecture and the buildings that we're living in. Do you agree?
Oh, very much so. Architecture is, and noble architecture, and an architecture that has a grammar, a syntax, and built upon the geometry of nature in particular, is another way of having a touchstone of the mind of God in an environment that we're all surrounded by. I mean, architecture isn't just purely for shelter, but it is in many senses the microcosm of the universe. God was depicted as an architect since the time of Plato, the master of the compasses, or as the divine geometer. So the idea that architecture was that important, and in particular geometry, as Plato's Academy once wrote, it was once written above, "Let no man enter lest he know geometry." And so that element of architecture certainly is, far beyond the utilitarian version, cost-cutting version that we use today. I bemoan the level of architecture today. It's completely missing of soul, vacuous, and purely for financial gain. The architects of today are practically rock stars, as opposed to the patrons and the people and the context and the environment in which they should live. But
Such is our world, right?
Such is our world. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And it's rapidly changing. I know, even though I know that this podcast isn't about that, but maybe that'll change our future architecture moving forward. There was something I wanted to ask you that I was just thinking about. I was really curious. But okay, so tell us about where you went from here, because of course this is, to me, the awakening moment where someone is not essentially enlightened, but it was like you now went on the path, what we would say, to the light, to the east, and also you just kept going and going and going. So next you would go and you would get your degree. Tell us about what would happen there, and where that took you next.
Yeah, so it was, I felt in many ways the building and the spirit of this great architect were leading me on a path that I was compelled to take. So I had just completed my graduate work in ancient Near Eastern languages when 9/11 occurred. And I got handpicked from my department on behalf of the United States government to study Arabic, that I would be given a full ride academic scholarship because they were looking for somebody who had a deep knowledge of the ancient Near Eastern landscape, culture, and in particular the language. So for the building led me on this crusade to study Semitic languages, and there's a canon of them. And I wouldn't say I'd mastered them, but I was quite proficient in them. So my department, the head of my department said, listen, we got the best opportunity that you'll ever get as an academic, a full ride scholarship to one of these three major American universities, Brown and I think Yale was one of them. And I said, great, what's the remit? And they said, well, we want you to study Arabic within the context of contextualizing why 9/11 occurred. And I was right beside my supervisor at the time. And I was so enchanted by this building and needed to figure out why Hermes was on the dome. And so I said, but I was at the University of Toronto at the time. And I said, no, there's this building back in Winnipeg. I think it might be based on Masonic principles and perhaps even Hermetic philosophy. And my supervisor said, you're making the stupidest decision of your life. You'll never get an opportunity like this, where I had a young family too, that you'll get a full ride scholarship with a PhD, fast tracked if you study Arabic. And I was like, no, I have to study this building. So it sent me down. So then I went to the University of Amsterdam. I'd spent about 2 years in the Bibliotheca Philosophica Hermetica, the most beautiful art library anywhere in the world for studying the ancient Western mystery tradition. And then ultimately another breadcrumb of the building fell, which is that behind it all, even though it's important to understand the philosophy of the building, I needed to actually also understand the architecture. So that led me to the University of Cambridge under David Watkin to look at Freemasonry and architecture all the time, just being led by this building. So in the end, a cacophony of graduate degrees that directed by a building.
Yeah, but it's interesting. You had this opportunity, but you followed your passion, what was leading your heart. And that's great. And how has everything turned out for you? Are you happy with your decisions?
Yeah. I mean, I feel so fortunate that I was able to explore something that I love, that I felt very Sherlock Holmesian in being a sleuth on a living architectural puzzle. And so, yeah, no, I wouldn't change a thing. I mean, it's very eclectic field of knowledge, but it's opened doors for me I never would have expected. Like, for instance, how I went from the architecture of Freemasonry to the brash city architecture of Astana, the capital city of Kazakhstan, all connected, bizarrely.
It is. And I find that this eclectic research that a lot of us do, that's not essentially high paying, or, we're living this ritzy lifestyle, or, how the common man might say, you're successful. In our minds, we're successful in our own areas with what we do. And it doesn't have to exchange to money or relate to that, or fame as well. As long as we're happy doing our work, that's, I feel, what's most important. And then also, hopefully adding some beauty, some light, some knowledge to the world. And that's exactly what you're doing, Frank. So again,
thank you. I didn't set out to do that, but I appreciate hearing that from you. It was more obsession again on the quest of knowledge, and I wouldn't give that up for anything. Knowledge over mammon, that's a no-brainer.
Definitely. Amen to that. And tell us about this. You mentioned Astana. What's going on with Astana, and for the viewers out there that don't know about that?
Okay, so just as unique an introduction with the Manitoba Ledge, but I was preparing a graduate course at the University of Manitoba in Department of Architecture on utopia and imaginary cities, the idea of paradise on earth. So I was framing this course that was going to be from Plato's Atlantis, the first written utopia, to Astana, the capital city of Kazakhstan, currently called Nur-Sultan. But at the time, so that was the title of my course, From Atlantis to Astana, a survey of paradisical cities. I'm preparing my graduate work and surfing the net, and I knew nothing about the wide promulgated belief that was circulating on the net, that Astana was perceived as being the most bizarre alien capital ever constructed, and that it had been given this moniker, Illuminati capital of the world, interwoven with all these Masonic principles. Now, it's been 4 years looking at the architecture of Freemasonry. I thought, how did I miss out on this?
Sure.
So there on my computer screen, where every tab was Astana Illuminati, capital of the world, and throughout. And at that moment that I have this epiphany of discovering this for the first time, I had a call from the chief protocol officer of Manitoba at the Manitoba Legislative Building. And when dignitaries come, they want to woo them with this extraordinary building, unlike anywhere else in the world. So, and I toured Her Majesty the Queen and several other people. So they were like, oh, I get this call from the protocol officer. He's a friend of mine. I said, Frank, we have the ambassador of Kazakhstan and his wife, and you have to give them, if you're available this afternoon, to give them a tour of the Manitoba Ledge. And it was like the penny dropped. I'm looking at my Kazakhstan, and now I have this opportunity to tour the ambassador. So I'm touring him throughout the building, and I'd spent the afternoon just nerding out on the architecture. We complete the tour. We have brunch, and I said something so bullish and brash. I said, I know what you're doing. And he said, Dr. Albo, what are we doing? I said, well, your capital city. I know what you're doing. Well, what are we doing? I said, well, you're using architecture to announce yourselves on the world stage. You come out of the Soviet Union and you're using architecture, build it and they will come. It's a very powerful tool. And he said, yes, that is exactly what we're doing. And I said, well, you're missing something. And he said, okay, what are we missing? And I said, you need a foundation myth, because without understanding why you built this city and having a meaning connected to each one of your buildings, it looks like to others, because the buildings are so strange, I have to say, like it is some new world order capital. And he said, okay, well, who's going to write that? And right there on the spot, I said, I am. And that set me on another quest to study Astana. So about 3 weeks later, I applied for a grant to travel to Astana, review the capital city. And in this case, I have to say, no, I said this brashly. I really did. It was intuition, but at least in the case of the Manitoba Legislative Building, it was garnered by some academic impulses. This one was pure intuition. I thought, this city is so strange. There has to be some underlying, the symbols are so apparent and overt. There must be something underlying it. And so I've been there about 7-8 times, going all through the archives, given access to the master plans office, meeting all the architects, and they were wondering what got me so interested in it. And I eventually deciphered that the buildings themselves were part of a universal plot pattern, that even beyond the intent of the architects, and I'd even given my presentation to the leading architects that designed the building, like Norman Foster and his head office in London. Norman Foster is like Zeus in the pantheon of gods of architects. And I had told them where subliminally they were drawing these motifs that they themselves did not even know, that when they were playing with building a city from scratch, they were drawing from ancient mythology and foundation myths. And in particular, the most powerful one there is which is the mother myth of all foundation myths. And that is about the tree in the Garden of Paradise. And in the center of Astana, there is a building called the Baitirik Tower, which is modeled after the tree of life that emerges out of a Garden of Paradise. And ultimately how a hero emerges to defeat a malevolent snake that circles up. I mean, this is sounding very familiar, Genesis peeps. But this tale is the original tale, and it comes from the tale of Etana. It's the oldest foundation myth ever written, and it describes the birthing of a city called Etana. This city is called Astana. You can't make it up. And how Etana, the king of Etana, of an ancient Mesopotamian king, rides up on the back of an eagle after having rescued the eagle. And from it, it begins with there was a city, an architect, and a tower. And that's exactly the impetus of designing this city from scratch. They had a tabula rasa. There was literally nothing there. And the president at the time said, we're going to build a city unlike any other, and we're going to draw on the history and culture of the world as the backbone to building it. And I don't know if you're a student of Jungian philosophy, but they inadvertently had drunk deep from the well of archetypes. And it was my impulse that it was there. And little did I know that it actually was there. So that's why I wrote this book. So I spent 4 years researching it. I know this is, I probably saw myself off the academic tree and we could dig into it. But I'd spent several years researching it. And then ultimately when I completed it, it was missing something that I felt was essential to drawing the audience in. And that was a series of breadcrumbs, like the architect left for me at the Manitoba Legislative Building. He placed a series of breadcrumbs, hoping perhaps just one person would figure out the true meaning and intent of that building. And so I wrote Astana, Architecture, Myth, and Destiny. On one level, it's a story about understanding the mystery, mythology, and symbolism of the most bizarre capital ever conceived or constructed at one level. But on another level, there's a whole other thing going on. And it's a series of symbolic breadcrumbs that I've carefully placed throughout the text and everywhere else in the book, hoping that one day, one person's going to decipher it. And if they do, I had this prize. It was around $30,000 at the time. It's since expired, but I'm doing a new edition very soon. And I'm going to make it a very large amount of a cryptocurrency I'm very fond of called Cardano or ADA. So that's the next chapter of where that went. Probably need to edit this somewhat because I was all over the map, but there you have it.
No, that's okay. You did great, Frank. And it's interesting that you're carrying the baton, and then also this line of thought and teaching for students to go after you to search for these clues. And I find it fascinating. Is there any ties to Freemasonry and the Illuminati there?
I mean, not the Illuminati per se, as the Illuminati known as a fabric of fiction and sensationalistic literature, but instead the impetus of Freemasonry, I mean, which is that architecture could help ameliorate the world, that architecture, symbols, and our imagination are the most powerful tools for governing the mind and ushering in a reformation of the world. And that is exactly what is at place in the buildings as narrated by me, and that architecture influences our thoughts, our feelings, our behaviors, our well-being. And I think it was, yes, Churchill once said, we build our buildings and then our buildings build us. And so that's actually a big clue in my book, if you want to read it, how you can, read between the lines. There is a meta-narrative to the entire thesis of the book. But in order to do that, I needed some kind of dangly carrot, and I don't do it just merely for fun, but I do it for the purpose of invoking our imagination, just as Frank Worthington Simon, the architect of the Ledge, did for me. He cultivated my mind and my interest in history, something I was a very poor student. I had no opportunity for advancement in academia, but I felt that the building and those series of clues honed and trained me in such a way that I became a clever sleuth. So I thought, can I now give that to another generation of readers? So there you have it.
Great. And I find the history really interesting as well for Astana. And then now it's Sultana. Is that how you pronounce, or Sultan?
Nur-Sultan.
Nur-Sultan. And who does that represent? Can you tell the audience?
Okay, so Nur-Sultan is the first name of the first president of Kazakhstan. And when I mean president, I would put him in the category of like the Tom Brady of world autocrats. Nobody in a purely democratic run country could build so magnanimously a $60 billion architectural experiment. So he was able to do that. This is and Kazakhstan at the time didn't have a lot of wealth, and yet they poured all of now it's probably the second wealthiest Central Asian country. It's the wealthiest Central Asian country, but I mean just slightly under Russia in terms of its per capita growth. So they went on a gamble in terms of pouring the national wealth into the civics of a city that most people associate Kazakhstan with Borat. And so they had a big uphill battle to climb. And so he's Nur-Sultan Nazarbayev. He is, he's a George Washington meets a kind of Walt Disney. That's probably the best way to describe him. Walt Disney was deeply motivated by the imagination and believed that fantasy and architecture would help guide the construction of cities. He was more interested in city building and design than he was anything else. The last 30 years of his life, Walt Disney, that is. And so Nur-Sultan Nazarbayev is kind of, he's not a Freemason, but does he carry the Masonic mantle? Oh, definitely. Is he Walt Disney? No. Does he build a fantasy capital? Oh, yes. Is he Thomas Jefferson, who wrote about architecture and was an architect? Yes. Did all of them believe that architecture would be a governing principle for a new nation? Very much so. So in that, they're I think one and the same being.
Yeah, and then I believe it's every 3 years, all the world's religious leaders meet in the Palace of Peace and Reconciliation. Is that correct?
I know, and you can't make this up. Where do they meet? Yes. So every 3 years, the Palace of Peace and Reconciliation, which is a giant glass pyramid, and at the apex of this giant glass pyramid, the world religious leaders meet, and so you can't make that up. Immediately, your imaginative leanings are drawn to, surely this is some massive global plot, and I don't think that is the intent of the building. It is more the intent when you build something from new, that you look for your highest aspirations. So yeah, and there it is. It's the most bizarre building. It's a giant glass pyramid. And the way you ascend up it is from darkness to light. That was very much the intent of it. And so that happens, yeah. And there are several other buildings that even are more richly laden in esotericism than that, which is, for instance, the Presidential Library, which is a giant blue domed eye that peers out into the cosmos. So you've got a pyramid, you got an all-seeing eye, and you've got the tree of life, and the city architecture is very much got the gleanings of King Solomon's temple, with two bronze pillars of Yakin and Boaz. So I think, did they know that was the case? I mean, and I did probe them. No, but is that deep in the lexicon of learning of architects studying? Yeah, of course you're going to study Solomon's temple. It is the most widely used building incorporated in architecture throughout the world. It is the template of perfection in architecture. So there's a lot going on in this city, lots, tons. And so I wanted to do a careful deduction of each of its principles, and then later place my own series of breadcrumbs, hoping to lure you in even much deeper than the superficial story.
Do you know anything? I believe it was Kazakhstan. I don't know if it was Nur-Sultan, Nur-Sultan, right? That the Russia consecrated the Freemasonic Lodge, consecrated a lodge there. I believe it was in 2017. Did you hear anything about that?
No, no. Please send that to me. I did not know. I knew there was no Masonic lodges directly within the city, but that in particular, they were looking to draw upon world mythology and world history to show that Kazakhstan is uniquely placed in not being the West and not being the East, but being the navel of the world, as I'd like to see it, the heart of the Silk Road. And they want to bring back this old ethos, this ancient idea that right there in the center of the globe were the intermingling of the East and West, and therefore it's highly tolerant. I mean, it's an Islamic nation, but it's the most tolerant form of Islam. There's never been the veil, for instance. If there was, even though it has a I almost call it superficial form of Islam. It's a folk Islam, and the deeper psychology of the nation is rooted in probably the oldest religious tradition, which is known as Tengrianism. The idea that the immortal blue sky and the animism of the earth is where we should find our sustenance. It's a very much ecologically friendly, open, adaptive form of religion, and that's very much Kazakhstan today. And I think that's why it's going to succeed among all the other Central Asian nations, not being, say, for instance, Afghanistan or Turkmenistan, because it's got a deep history of cross-pollination of ideas, both Greek philosophy as well as Judaism, both Eastern, Far Eastern, Buddhist traditions, as well as Nestorian Christianity. Perhaps yeah. So it's a very interesting place. Like, totally unique.
Yeah, when I researched the area, I haven't, I'm not an expert, but I've done some research, and it seems as if the people might be descendants of the Khans, possibly,
Mm-hmm.
and they're also a Russian European mix within them, with the populace. And then you also see them setting this up as the new center, you say, of the world, where before that would have been, in Greece or in, the Mediterranean area. And now we're looking to the north, and there's some very powerful people, of course, in that area. And it would be interesting if that was the case. And I know it took a lot of money to build this area. And from what I understand, the history before the city was built, it was actually, during the Soviet Union, there was like gulag camps and all different types of things here. Yeah. So.
Oh yeah. Like this is a part of the world that suffered from, and this is part of what I describe as the foundation myth of the emergence of this capital. this area was the area where not just the gulags, but the worst version of the gulags, and even a form of the gulags that was for wives of the dissenters. It was right in this region. Furthermore, Kazakhstan is where the Soviet Union had secretly detonated, like 6,000 times Hiroshima when they were first experimenting with nuclear power. And it's also an area that had suffered under tyrannical rule from the Tsars and much earlier. So it emerges out of, if I could use the term, like a phoenix from the ashes, from like a really dark, the casualties of that have occurred on that soil just in the 20th century alone. It had the largest ecological disaster happen, I mean, far more so than even the Amazon, was the draining of the Aral Sea. And why? So that they could bring farming to Kazakhstan, which never existed before. Huge failure, massive famine, 14 million people, the vast majority of their population perished. They also had the gulags there, 20th century, not a fun time. And then furthermore is where they were doing nuclear detonation. And from that, they decide to build a forever utopia, kind of a new Geneva, where they would shine a kind of new light on the world, but it came from destruction and hardship. And that was how I framed this myth. I describe it as a myth, but I don't use myth in the terms of like, fleeting, frivolous stories of the gods of old, but instead myth as being one of the most powerful tools to open our mind. And that myth very much so has been at the heart of world civilization for thousands of years. We wouldn't even think of Rome if we did not know of the foundation myth of Rome, which was the battling brothers of Romulus and Remus, or the Exodus out of Egypt. These age-old stories are of which there is no historical merit, have been part of the guiding principles of a nation. Like in the 19th century, it was the manifest destiny of America that guided America's idea that it should further expand into the West, because it was by providential decree. And so myth in that sense is really powerful. And what I did was try to invent a myth, but one that I uncovered at the same time. So it's kind of a difficult thing to do, is to say I believe these buildings are plot devices of a mega myth, a monomyth. I describe it. And I'm not just inventing it, I'm actually deducing it from the building's architecture. In the case of the Manitoba Legislative Building, I am deciphering a building that already exists. In this case, I was, or decoding, as it were. In this case, I was doing exactly that in reverse. I was taking all the principles I learned in decoding to encode a foundation myth. And I tell you right from the beginning, I said, this is a foundation myth. And the foundation myth is to set about to do one thing, hopefully make the world a better place. But in order to enchant you, I'm going to place these buildings as characters that is going to take you down on a journey. And the journey is to overcome the greatest threats of our time. And I describe them as religious extremism, the sustainability of the planet, and then the proliferation of nuclear weapons. And that Kazakhstan is uniquely placed among all countries of the world because it is perhaps the most tolerant religious nation in being open to all these world religions, characterized by the pyramid of peace and reconciliation. It's a city that had one of the fourth largest arsenal of nuclear material and decided to get rid of all of it and to become one of the world leaders, probably the most forward leader in nuclear non-proliferation, getting rid of nuclear weapons. And it's also using what is really fossil fuels to raise funds to change the world and make it more planetarily sustainable. So in the case of the architecture of Astana, it's rooted in those ideas. Like the World Expo was using planetary sustainability. Will you edit this? I have someone at my door.
Of course, yeah, go for it. No problem, Frank.
Hold on.
Yeah, not a problem, bro.
I have a radio interview. Okay, I'm back.
All right, cool. Yeah, if you want to go another 15, 30 minutes, if you have that.
Sure thing. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I could edit this out, no problem. Okay, where were we?
No, how about we riff for a while there? So so I finished that. No one's deciphered it. A copy of the book went to Donald Rumsfeld, who has an interest in the Central Asia. I further learned that cryptographers at the FBI and some crackerjacks at CIA haven't been able to crack it yet.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, so that was neat. And yeah, I received thousands of submissions, and I'm dying to to say, yes, that's exactly right. But it hasn't happened.
Interesting. And what's the name of your book, so people out there, we'll say it again at the end of the podcast, could possibly get it and then try to decipher these clues, and anything else you could tell them about that?
So it's Astana, Architecture, Myth, and Destiny. It's, I believe, on Amazon still, and or you can find it on my website, frankalbo.com.
Okay, awesome. And let's talk a little bit about what you're doing now, the projects that you're working on. Of course, this is, 20 years of work. You had the Manitoba legislative building, Astana, and now, of course, you have new projects that you're working on. And I found them very interesting before we started this podcast. So let's talk about that.
Okay, so my next book is called Where the Creator Sat, and it's the area described in the local Anishinaabe language as Manitowabe. It's a the largest, oldest rock settlement site in North America. It's like a Stonehenge. It's a series of rock formations that were designed in a symbolic, meaningful way, perhaps around 5,000 years ago. And it's a site that's currently perimetered by a giant 20-foot barbed wire fence, and it was placed there by one of my colleagues at the University of Winnipeg named Jack Steinbring, who is perhaps the world expert of petroforms. That's what they're, petro, Greek for rock, rock formations. Think of the Great Medicine Wheel in Wyoming, Bighorn Medicine Wheel. But this site is 9 acres. It's the formations have not been deciphered, but what we do know is that it has a rather sophisticated astronomical knowledge base, and that it is something on the order of an astronomical clock. But according to the plain Indian tradition of this area, the site has only recently been recovered. And the site in particular is believed to be where the Anishinaabe, that is the name for Cree, Ojibwa, and the Plains people from North Dakota, part of Montana, and the prairie region of Canada, migrated, being pushed from east to the center. The Anishinaabe people believed that they were lowered down through a hole in the sky, identified as the Pleiades, and there on Manitowabe, they were given their original instructions to how to be on Earth, and that these original instructions were inscribed in stone, not carved, as it were, in the case of the Ten Commandments, but that the stones themselves are vehicles for ancestor knowledge, that the grandfathers of these stones have a prophetic teaching, and for several millennia, the site was completely unknown. And then a short-lived revival occurred in the site, where it became an area of medicine work by the Grand Medicine Society, known as the Manitowabe, a secret society among the Ojibwa that go through an initiatic 4-degree initiation in a lodge, the procedure by which you elevate from apprentice to master very much dovetails with the first 3 grades of Freemasonry. And remarkably, there's been no scholarship, very, very little scholarship written on this. And if you look at what are known as Manitowabe birch bark scrolls, they have an uncanny similarity to 18th century tracing boards, which were the boards that were placed in Masonic lodges that would be used as mnemonic devices to understand what level or grade of the craft that you were in should you miss your lines. And in the case of the Manitowabe, who have been recovering this site, it's believed that there's a prophecy that this site would bring about a reformation of all Indigenous people, and that it was from this site that all Indigenous people had emerged. This book looks not just simply at the archaeology of the site, which is absolutely fascinating, and not just the sophisticated astronomical principles, but instead looks at the ethnography of this group of people and how this site may act as a lightning rod for a full-scale Indigenous reawakening. And so I'm writing about it, hoping that it becomes more exposed. As I said, it's deep, deep in the woods of the White Shell Provincial Park. It's perimetered by a fence. In order to access it, you need a key from the Historic Research Branch of Manitoba, and you need to be somewhat sanctioned, as it were, by the spiritual gatekeeper, who has since become a dear friend of mine. His name's Elder Dave Kershane. So I first knew about this site 15 years ago when I was a research fellow in Department of Anthropology. And the person that had studied it for many years locked all of his field notes in a sealed chest in his former office. And so I petitioned the president of my university to first look at them. And when I did, I realized, oh my gosh, this is a very meaningful archaeological site. So that was about 15 years ago, and then it's come full circle over in the last 2 years. That I just wasn't ready to write it at that time, but I am now. And so that's my next book. Really interesting. I hope we'll discuss this again at another time.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And just before you get on to the next line of thought or subject, do you know a little bit more you could tell us in the audience? You know, I'd like to know more about the initiation system, where they may have got these ceremonies. Did you find any cursory information you could share with us?
Okay, so according to the Ojibwa tradition, these were the original instructions that were given to them from a wise mythical trickster figure, but it's not rocket scientist to realize there's some form of culture contact happening here with migration and early settlers who came from Scotland and the UK, and perhaps even France, to this region during settlement periods 300 years ago. And that is a form of initiatic trading. They perhaps initiated a number of Anishinaabe medicine men and chiefs into Freemasonry, and then later they adopted it in their own guise.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's remarkable. Just the Joy Porter wrote a book called Freemasonry and Native American Freemasonry, and she does touch upon it there. And a number of early 20th century, late 19th century writers had noted that the Medeoan tradition is Freemasonry in Ojibwa guise, but nothing more has been explored on the architectural and artistic elements of these birch bark scrolls. Several of them are in the Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C. But having seen my fair share of tracing boards, the orientation of the lodge, entering in from the east, where the master sits, how where the altar is placed, how you circumambulate the lodge, how certain symbolic features on the birch bark were meant to be mnemonics as part of higher learning. The fact that the culminating degree, the final degree, is a death and resurrection rite. That there are references to architecture, and all of this is anathema to everything we know about the Anishinaabe people. They're largely egalitarian. There's no secret fellowship. They don't do traditional wisdom within the context of a formatted lodge, and they don't write anything down, let alone a symbolic form of a tracing board. So it just, to me, it's patently obvious there's some culture contact with Freemasonry, and I'll be writing about it in this book. I think a whole chapter I'll give to Freemasonry and the Medeoan.
Sounds awesome. Can't wait to read it. And I'm going to pick up all your books, and I suggest the audience does as well. Is there anything else that you would like to discuss with us?
Well, no, there's one other project I'm working on, which is obviously I used to give tours of the Manitoba Legislative Building, big part of my summer. And I am working on a project now to convert the tour into a gamified experience, perhaps in VR. So anyone from around the world could just download the app, walk through the building. But rather than it just being kind of a boring fuddy-duddy tour by a tour guide, instead, I have gamified it, and I make you the protagonist in a race against the clock. And you have to decipher these symbols in a very timely manner. And if you do so, and I'm still working on this, you'll be rewarded with. Right now, I'm looking at this cryptocurrency called Cardano or ADA. I'm very fond of this project. Anyone interested in cryptocurrencies, please look at this project called Cardano, CARDANO, and their token ADA. And they're a decentralized blockchain network. And I want to put this game onto the blockchain and have the puzzles and maybe even NFTs called non-fungible tokens inside the game version of it. But it's authentically going to be the Manitoba Legislative Building. But I want to put you in the role as deciphering it for the first time and getting actually rewarded in a tradable digital asset that has value.
Sounds like a great idea, Frank. I think it would do really well and possibly start copycats, or maybe you could be involved in that and other people do something similar, because I realize, that the younger generation, we started out with the video games, the standing up, and then I see my son now who's 14 and he's totally into games. And as we grow up, that's still kind of instilled within us, and this could be a more intellectual, fun game for people that are into this type of stuff and Freemasonic lost symbol kind of type of thing. So that's cool.
Exactly. Totally
Awesome.
how I want to do it. I hope it, you never know with these things, but yeah.
Sure. Yeah, you got to try. You never know. So one more time where people could find your great work, Frank.
Thank you. Either on my website, frankalbo.com, or on Amazon. I believe all my titles are there. Yeah, good luck, and thank you for having me on your show. I didn't know. I live in a very small bubble. But
We all do, Frank.
Yeah, but when I got familiar with what you're doing and your work, I immediately jumped on the opportunity to speak. I could tell you come from a good place and you want to do do the right work.
I appreciate that, Frank, and I do, and I appreciate you spreading the light and taking your time with the Gnostic warrior community and with me today. Until next time, take care.
Peace. Take care.
All right, you too.